the chair of the Department of Theater and an associate professor in the Department of Theater. I'm also the associate dean for research in the College of Fine Arts. And just to let you know, my own research interests have to do with how we use theater in non-theater settings. So that's sort of how I ended up here. I'm interested in how we can use theatrical techniques to help people in other parts of their lives, not just how do we put on a show, although I do work on shows as well. So I'm interested in how it can improve people's well-being, how can it support various types of learning, and that kind of thing. So hopefully everyone can hear me and see me now. And if you cannot, please do note in the chat that you're having issues. There's also closed captioning available. So if you need that, I believe there is a magical way that you could turn that on in Zoom, but I know it is set up for that. So again, if you have any issues, please let us know in the chat, and we will attempt to address those for you as we go along. So I am going to ask for a little bit of kind of audience participation, which I know is a little bit odd on this sort of thing. Let's see, I need to be able to see you all a little bit, would be nice. I don't know how to do it. I see you up there. Okay, all right, cool. Well, anyway, so how many of you all experience some sort of fear or even just like total panic when you're faced with doing a presentation? And you can give me a thumbs up. You can give me a nod if you want to turn on your camera. You can, yeah, okay. Let's see, yep, okay, thank you, Anna. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Yeah, this is a very typical kind of response to doing, being asked to do a presentation. Most of us are not used to that sort of thing. We don't particularly enjoy having a whole bunch of people staring at us. So you are not alone if you are feeling concerned and nervous about this type of experience. But what I find, well, here's a question for you also, is how many of you have seen a horror movie or a thriller or even a movie like Jaws? Anybody seen anything like that? And if nobody's given me a thumbs up or a heart or a party icon or something, I don't know what's going on. Oh, the thumbs are going. All right, awesome. Okay, can you, is that you or is that me controlling that up there? That's me. Okay, cool. I'm gonna redo this so that I can see more of you simultaneously. Ah, there we go. Oh, that's better. That's much better. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I've got a dual screen situation here, y'all. Okay, so we've seen this sort of thing. And what's the scariest part of a horror movie or this kind of movie where there's something, a killer on the loose, or we've got somebody lurking in the background? What is the most scary part of that to you all? Like, why is it scary? And you can type your answers. You can unmute yourself if you would like to, just sort of shout it out. Yeah, Luke, thank you. The suspense and the tension, that's great. Any other things that you can think of that might be explanations of why this is scary? You see somebody maybe connecting to audio, maybe not sure. I'll give you a second. Great. Yeah, the anticipation, the buildup. Absolutely. A sudden act. Absolutely. That jump scare where something suddenly finally comes out of the darkness at you. It's unpredictable, 100%. Yeah, this is great. I think it can, and I think you're all correct, right? And I think it has to do with that anticipation. And the thing that's unseen, right? Like the boogeyman, like when you're a kid, I used to be scared that there was somebody under my bed who was going to grab me when I got into my bed, like grab me like as I was getting in. So I would run from the other side of the room and just like leap into the bed as far away from the edge of the bed as possible so that they couldn't possibly get my way, right? Which is absurd. Nobody was under my bed. But I couldn't see it, right? And so that was what was so scary. And that's why Jaws, right? You got that dun dun music, and you see the innocent person splashing around in the water, and you can't see anything, but you suspect something is lurking beneath the surface. So I think it's the monster you cannot see that is the most frightening, right? Yeah, and no control of the situation. Absolutely. That is totally terrifying, that lack of control, and that unknown, right? So the thing that is frightening, I think, about many things is the thing we can't see and the thing that's maybe unpredictable. And so I think it's helpful for us to kind of name or identify our fears, really about anything, but certainly about public speaking or public presentation, because I think that if we name those things, it helps to kind of take away some of their power. Because often once you see the scary thing in a movie, it's a little bit less scary after all. So I'm gonna turn it over to you again to ask you, are there specific things about presenting your own ideas, your research in public, or really doing anything, publicly, that are scary to you? What are the things what do you think is gonna happen? Like, what's the boogeyman under the bed going to do to you when you are presenting publicly? Is there anything specific that you can name, or is it just that kind of like, I don't like it? What does wild imagination say is the terrible thing that's going to happen if I present and this is going to happen? I will stutter and mess up. Yeah, totally. I'll forget my words. Constant fear of getting it messed up, not knowing where to look. That's a great one. That's a great one. Yeah, absolutely. Other things that might cause this fear. What if we go wrong? Yeah, it may change my impression on people. Okay, so the way that people think about you as a result of mistakes or stuttering or any of those things, absolutely. Mispronouncing a word because you're nervous, 100%. I've done that many times. People not paying attention to you. Yeah, absolutely. That is terrifying, especially if the whole purpose is to like be up there and present, and then part of your audience isn't paying attention. They're on their phone or whatever it is that they're doing. Yeah, that's not fun. That's not at all fun. Yeah, absolutely. The fear of someone asking a question I am unprepared for, 150%. Absolutely. I frequently, when I started teaching, I teach theater history and I teach over 2,000 years of history. So there's no way I can know all that stuff. And students would ask me questions that just like felt like to me like they came totally out of left field. I was like, oh my goodness, that's a very interesting question. I have no idea what the answer is. So yeah, getting comfortable with the idea that some questions may be unpredictable because you can't control your audience necessarily. But yeah, how do you deal with that? Totally great, awesome. Wondering what everyone is thinking as you're talking. I'll forget what I practiced. Yeah, these are all totally legitimate fears that I think are probably shared by most people who do any form of public speaking, even people who are experienced and who look like they're super comfortable doing that public speaking. It is, all of these things are scary, for sure. So thank you. Are there any tricks that you all currently have up your sleeves that you use to address some of those fears or concerns in preparation for doing a presentation? Do you have anything that has worked. I suspect you probably do. Yeah, practice. Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, till it becomes sort of automatic. That is so important. That is so important. That's why in theater, we rehearse and we rehearse and we rehearse and we rehearse ad nauseum until sometimes people feel a little bit bored during rehearsal and they need that audience to kind of kick it up a notch. But absolutely, trying to stay calm, that is so, so, so important. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that. Thank you, Shiver. Deep breathing. Yep. Let's see what else. You have at least the first minute of your talk completely memorized. That's great. Yeah, really kind of knowing where you're going. So, so helpful. Picking a good point to look at beforehand. That's really interesting. Okay, so that means maybe being in the room before the time that you're going to be presenting. Yeah, great idea. Complete blueprint of the speech and playing it in your head. Awesome. Taking small breaks of 4 to 5 seconds in between, sort of in between your sections, I'm assuming, of what you're talking about. Great. And realizing in the end, we will all make mistakes and we can't please everyone or make everyone agree with your ideas. That's a great sort of takeaway lesson is, yeah, we're all going to make mistakes and everyone in your audience will have made mistakes in their presentations in the past. So yeah, I would presume a certain level of goodwill among your audience members so that they understand that it is nerve-wracking to be up there. And you understand that it's nerve-wracking to be up there. So as an audience member who has sympathy for that sort of experience, you can also bring your A game to just being an audience member, right? Is paying attention, right, to what people are saying, not getting distracted with our phones and computers and other stuff, other people in the room, whatever. Because it does take a certain amount of work, right, to be an audience member and to be attentive to what is going on and what is being presented to us. And I think that's become a little bit harder over the past couple of years, right? As we have been doing so much online, and it is so easy to check your email when you're on Zoom, to start doing a little other work on the side, or checking Amazon, or you're getting texts and your notifications are still on, all that stuff. It's very seductive, and it's very easy to get distracted. So I think you now also as an audience member can kind of think from the perspective of the speaker and what do they need from me too. And if you're thinking that way, as you go into a presentation, you're assuming hopefully that your audience has this kind of goodwill and energy toward you. You can maybe calm yourselves a little bit and trust that your audience wants you to succeed and is interested, wants to know something about what it is that you're thinking. And no, they may not agree with you, and that's okay, right? That's why we're in a university. People do not agree with each other all the time in a university, goodness knows, right? I don't even know if in the Department of Theater we can all agree on the definition of theater. So, and that is what an academic space is about. It's about contested ideas potentially. So that's all great. So during the presentation, the rest of this presentation today, I'm going to give you a few practical tips on communicating with an audience about your research and also managing your own anxiety during a presentation. Okay. So I'm going to advance to my first slide. Oh, good. Record yourself. Sorry, I just saw that, Eliana. Yeah, record yourself practicing. Listen back so you know the length and you know where your weaknesses are. That's a great idea. I personally hate listening to and watching recordings of myself. I don't know very many people who do enjoy that, but if you can power through that, absolutely, that is a really good tool. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Oh my goodness, there we go. Okay, so I like to think of communication and presentations specifically, but any communication as kind of like a game of catch, right? There are certain things that are required. There's a ball or something to throw is required. You need someone to throw the thing, you need someone to receive or catch the thing. The catcher has to be ready to receive the ball or whatever it is you're throwing. I don't know how many times like my younger child has just like thrown something at me and then been surprised when I didn't catch it. They're like, why didn't you catch it? Why did you catch it with your face? And I'm like, because you didn't tell me you were throwing something. So, you know, and then the person throwing should probably have, you know, relatively decent aim to get the ball sort of near the catcher, right? That helps. And then the catcher also needs to be willing to shift around a little bit in order to catch, right? Because like in all likelihood, your thrower is not necessarily going to be getting it like right in the middle of your target, right? And you also need attention, right? Everybody needs to be paying attention to what's going on. And this is all required in game of catch, and it's also required in communication scenario. Your ball is the message. That's the thing that you're pitching to your audience, right? So you need someone to throw, that's you. You need sort of decent aim, right? You need to know where your listener is, right? And not just kind of physically, although that may help, but also, is the listener ready to receive my message? And what do I need to do to help the listener be ready to listen to me and understand what I'm talking about? And then you need that person who is the listener or the catcher to receive the message, right? Are they ready to listen? Are they paying attention? And are they willing to do a little bit of work of interpretation, of hearing what you have to say and kind of thinking about it, and then maybe ask questions and things like that. So, so you're in this situation as you're preparing for a presentation, you're all the pitchers or the people throwing the ball, and you do need to learn a little bit of aim. But before we start thinking about ourselves and thinking about what we need to know and what we need to do in order to aim the message at our audience, let's think about what our catchers need. What does the audience need? Because I'm a theater artist, right? So I know that the sort of perhaps stereotype of theater people and artists is that they're all thinking about themselves and it's all about me and blah, 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 my line. But really good theater artists are trying to think about their audiences, right? And the point of view of the experience, the theater experience, what is the audience going to be experiencing during this performance? What's their experience going to be like? Are they prepared for the experience? And then we think about how can we prepare them to have this experience? How can we prepare them to catch the balls, the artistic balls we're throwing at them, just to kind of extend that metaphor beyond its useful life. And what would I want if I were sitting in the audience seat? Because of course it is always about me. So the first thing that you want to do is take care of your audience, right? What's their perspective, right? You want to make sure they know who you are, shockingly. You don't have to tell them your whole life story. They need to know the title or the subject of your talk or your presentation. And they need to know that you're starting. I have in fact seen presentations where I missed the start of it and then was sort of astonished to learn that we were sort of in the middle of it. And that could be a really cool sort of postmodern performance art kind of thing, but it's probably not great in a research presentation. So it, you know, that's super basic, but perhaps could use saying, because I have seen it where it's not been communicated and I'm 5 minutes in and I'm like, oh, we have started and we are okay. Now I'm paying attention. You want to also make sure that your audience can hear and see you, right? So how do you make sure that they can hear and see you? You would, of course, if you're in person, you would look at them, make a little bit of eye contact, kind of look at the, I mean, I know sometimes it's hard to look directly at people in a presentation. It can be a little bit scary. And many of us do everything we can to avoid eye contact with strangers, because that can open a door to them asking you something, or asking you for something, or telling you something you don't want to know. But in this case, it is helpful to make a little bit of eye contact with your audience, and see how they look. Do their eyes look sort of glazed over? Are they looking somewhere else? Do they look confused? And you can also just ask them, can you hear me? Can you see me? And if they can't, then adjust if possible. Invite them to come closer if they're really far away. People really do have a tendency to sit as far away to the back of the room as possible, because somehow we think we are invisible at the back of a room, which of course we are not. It's pretty easy to see people even in the back of a room. And so, invite them to come a little bit closer, so that it's not so much heavy lifting on you and also on them to try to hear what you're saying. So assuming they can hear and see you, what then? Are you necessarily going to be understood? Exactly, the answer to that question is no. There are a couple of things you want to do. Of course, you want to speak at an appropriate pace so that your audience can follow you. And, when we get nervous, we often speed up and go much faster than we might normally in everyday life in terms of our rate of speech. So again, this is where kind of checking in and looking at your audience and trying to determine what the expressions on their faces might mean in terms of their ability to follow what you're saying, is then check in with them, make sure. And then the other part is articulating your words clearly. And this is something that we all can work on. It's something we work on. Our students in theater take whole classes on this, on sound production and on the use of text and their speech to communicate. But a big part of clear enunciation is making sure that your consonants do what we call is popping. So many people drop the ends of their words or the ends of their sentences in terms of volume. And that is actually what makes it very difficult to understand somebody when they're speaking, is if they start dropping the final consonants and the final sounds on their words, it can be quite tricky to understand what they're saying. So it's just something to kind of attune yourself to and think about. And I'll give you we'll do a little exercise with this in a minute. But then the other thing you want to do is you want to know your audience. Who is going to be in your audience? And obviously you can't necessarily do a giant survey and find out who are all these people and what are their life stories, but you can figure some of this out from the context of the presentation, right? So think about what information might be useful to you as you craft a presentation, right? What do you think you need to know about the people you're going to be talking to? Several things are expectations. What are their expectations for the presentation? General background, right? So are you doing a presentation in front of a class that you've been in for the whole semester, and so you all have this sort of common experience of the entire semester together, so you've developed sort of a language and you've explored common ideas and topics and so forth, right? Or are you addressing kids, right? Children who are in middle school, or yeah, who are these people, right? That just broadly speaking that you're going to be talking to, and what's the context of the presentation? Is this part of a conference? Is this a class project? Is this a thesis dissertation or thesis defense? What is that larger context for the presentation? Again, this will help you kind of shape what's the kind of information that I will need to include in order to carry my audience along with me, right? And then, so knowing who your audience is going to impact the way you present your research. And in particular, it's going to impact the language that you choose to use during your presentation, right? When you're trying to explain your ideas. So now we're going to do a little thing. And I'm going to put up the instructions for this in just a second. But I'll just talk through it for a moment and you can let me know if you have questions. I'd like you to take just a couple of like 2 minutes, literally just 2 minutes or so, to write a 2-sentence description of some research that you're working on, or if you're not actively engaged in research right now, or a specific project right now, maybe you could try describing in 2 sentences an important idea that informs your work or that informs the discipline that you're working in, you know, evolution or, you know, whatever, like that's super big. And, you know, I can't imagine trying to explain that in 2 sentences, but I bet you could do it. So take 2 minutes right now and write it down either on your computer or on a piece of paper, or whatever, 2 sentences describing some research you're working on or an important idea for you or your discipline. Okay, so starting now. Okay, you've got 1 more minute. Okay, so what I'd like you to do right now, just very briefly, is to read through what you've written and ask yourself, honestly, could a non-specialist in my field understand what I just written? Could my mom understand it if your mom is not a specialist in your field? Could my dad, could my brother or sister, could my cousin, whatever, could they understand it if they were to read through that? So just take a moment, look through it, and then if you think, I'm not sure that they could, make whatever adjustments you think are necessary to that. Okay, so we're gonna do a little pairing exercise, and Shiver is going to put you into to rooms to do this. And I'll tell you what the basic instructions are, okay? And I've got the kind of a summary of that up on the screen right now. But what you're gonna do is you're going to share what you've just written with your partner, with the person that you're in your little breakout room with. Person one, and you can select who is person one and who is person A. Person one will read their statement aloud to the other person. Person A, who is receiving, catching, reflects what they understood. So you actually should say, you know, what I understood you to say, or what you're trying to find out is X, Y, and Z. So you're saying back in your own words, your understanding of what person one has told you, what their statement is, okay? And then just take a moment to quickly chat about whether that matched. Did the understanding match the intention, right? And if not, why not? Can you two figure out maybe what could be done to adjust the statement? And then you'll switch and repeat that same process again. And there are a couple of things that you'll want to think about as you are for the listener, right? For our catcher, while they're reading their statement to you, think about the vocabulary. What are the words being used, and are they accessible? Right. So are they using specialized language that you can't understand? And if so, maybe make a note of that in your head or on a piece of paper, whatever. Is their rate of speech appropriate for you to understand? Are they speaking too quickly, too slowly? Highly unusual, that would be too slow, but could happen. Are they articulating their words in a way that you can understand, or is the speech very mushy? And also, last thing, which is very important, is are they breathing? They're not breathing. Maybe make a note of that as well. And we're going to talk about breathing in a couple of minutes, okay? So, but it might be helpful for you to notice, is my partner breathing? Because we often hold our breaths when we are nervous. Okay, so we're going to go into the rooms now. You all have 5 minutes total, so about 2 minutes per person. You'll need to monitor your time, and then when the 5 minutes is up, we'll pull you back into the main group. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Shiver. Are you all good? right, welcome back. We have a few more people coming in. Right. So how was that, everybody? Did you make any discoveries? Good, thank you, Jacob, for the thumbs up. Margaret, thank you. Did you make any discoveries during that? My partner just preferred staying quiet. I know it's, yeah, this is hard. It's a little bit tricky. It's a little easier to do this kind of thing in person sometimes. Did you discover that you needed to adjust your language at all? Anybody? Or that it was perfect? You had the perfect statement that was going to be understood by all. General terms are more accessible than more specific terms, but more accurate. Yeah, I know. That's a tough, that is a tough sort of needle to thread, is that line between specificity that really gets at what you're trying to talk about and communicate, and using language that's general enough for a broader audience to understand. And so that's why it's really helpful to know, is your audience somewhat specialized? Would they know this term or would they not? And that way you can, if you need to define terms, you can define them, right? To help your audience understand. Of course, you're not going to be able to do that in a 2-sentence introduction, most likely, but you know that I'm going to need to define this really important term that's not just jargon. Yeah. Okay, great. Breathing and pausing was something I tended to neglect, but I figured it out. Excellent. Excellent. That's good. Yeah, developing a kind of sense of self-awareness a little bit, which is something that actors do in terms of their presentation, is they develop the ability to be paying attention to what it is that they're saying, their lines, right? But also, and the scene and what it is they're trying to communicate in that moment, but also paying attention to their own bodies and what their bodies are actually doing, so that they have a little bit more control over the nerves and the emotion, right, that we experience when we're presenting. So the next thing, I am going to do that right now. Thank you. Okay. All right. So the next thing we're going to look at a little bit are operative words, and I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because I want to get to breathing. Operative words can be, and this is something that's more generally helpful for your presentation, not just your 2-sentence, elevator speech type thing. But operative words are the most important words in your phrase or your sentence. They are the ones that do that heavy lifting in terms of conveying meaning to your audience, right? So these are the words you really need to make sure your audience understands, because depending on what you emphasize, meaning can shift. So, for example, we've got a couple of, we've got a sentence here. He was very rich, right? And I've taken that and I've emphasized the word was and used was as the operative word. And then on the other one, I've used very as an operative word, right? So, what does this do when we change the operative word? In the first case, he was very rich. That implies that he no longer is very rich. So I've got a little picture of somebody with the empty pockets, right? So that is quite different than he was very rich, right? That implies this is somebody in the past, right? And, he was extremely wealthy, right? But there's no sense of whether or not he is currently rich or is no longer rich, or, the present is not really something that is communicated. The state of this person in the present is not communicated. So this is something that you'll want to think about. And when you write your own presentation script, whatever that happens to be, you'll want to go through and really think about, what are the operative words in my presentation? What are the words that I really need to emphasize in order to make sure my audience understands what I am trying to communicate to them, right? Because we have our intended meaning, and then we may have the meaning that the audience comes to, right? Which may be different. It's that interpretive piece. And we can't control exactly what the audience is going to hear, right, or understand, but we can shape that by being careful about the language that we pick, and then how we actually emphasize particular words or ideas through our presentation. So let's talk briefly, very briefly again, about one other way that you can consider the perspective of your audience. Hopefully yours is a willing audience, but regardless of whether they're attending your presentation because they are interested in the subject matter or because they have to for a class, they do on some level want to be entertained. This doesn't mean you have to wear a boa and a sequined gown, although that probably would be amazing. But there are ways to think about the audience from that kind of, not really entertainment, we're not doing entertainment here, but that point of view of the audience and being interested and excited by what it is that you're communicating. One is, before anything else, is yourself communicating some of the passion you have for the material, right? You're studying this thing, hopefully, because you're interested in it. You find it exciting, meaningful. And so communicating some of that sense of the excitement and the thrill that you experience when you're studying this, that is entertaining, right? That sucks people in and gets them like, ooh, this person's excited. Maybe I should be excited too, right? Because we are social creatures and we tend to mirror the expression of the person that we're communicating with. And I'm sure some of you experience that with like arguing with someone. Somebody escalates, you're going to escalate. Somebody's yelling, you're going to start yelling. Somebody's not yelling, you're going to calm down. That we do that just kind of as a physiological response. So yeah, so communicating that interest in the material is important. Very general phrases tend not to be very entertaining. You want to, maybe if you're doing scientific research, of course, you want to get to generalizations that you can make about the field or about the law or about, whatever. But starting out your presentation with super generalizations, not super interesting, okay? Other ways of kind of hooking your audience, right, are specifics, being specific. So you could start with an intriguing or a relevant example, a provocative question, right, because that activates your audience and it engages them with something to do, right, something specific to do. A surprising statement or a surprising fact, something that's like counterintuitive, or really interesting, relevant historical context, right? These are all kind of things that you can do to hook your audience into what it is that you're talking about. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about, because we've been talking about taking care of other people. Let's take care of ourselves a little bit here, okay? Before your presentation, you want to give yourself at least 10 to 15 minutes where you can focus on the presentation and on not other things, right? Not on your friends, not on your text messages, not on your if you have kids. If you can give yourself a little bubble of 10 to 15 minutes before your presentation where you can really just go over your script, review what it is that you're going to be talking about, breathing, stretching, getting into character, however you want to put that, where you're not distracted by a lot of other stuff. Really, really helpful. The next thing, and I talked about this a few times, is breathing, okay? And I know this sounds ridiculous because of course, if you stop breathing, you die. So you're not stopping breathing, but we often hold our breath totally unconsciously, especially when we're anxious. And then that just sends the anxiety levels rising, right? So you can do this seated or lying down if you're in a private place, but seated is great. And I want to just have you do this yourselves right now as I'm talking you through it, okay? You can sit down or lie down, whatever you want, but if you're seated, right, sit in a chair where you can rest your feet flat on the floor, so that your legs aren't like dangling off of the chair. I'm short, so that often happens to me. And then just rest your hands kind of loosely on the tops of your thighs. If you're lying down, I would recommend lying with your knees elevated, so that the crook of the small of your back is kind of flattened out a little bit. Okay. And then I want you to close your eyes and then just take a moment and inhale through your nose and then exhale through your mouth. And there are scientific reasons for this that I can't explain to you because I'm not knowledgeable thoroughly about that, and I don't want to say silly things, but this has to do with certain nerves and vagus nerves and things like that. But this is quite helpful. So breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, kind of at a slow pace. It's helpful to count in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. And it's helpful, keep doing that. And it's helpful to maybe rest your hand on your sternum, on your chest. And you could also rest your hand kind of on your lower abdomen. And as you're breathing in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. Make sure you're feeling your belly, especially rise and fall just a little bit. Doesn't need to be a huge amount. But you want to release those abdominal muscles enough so that you're allowing your diaphragm to move downward and press that belly out a little bit. Allow your lungs to inflate and then lungs to deflate as you're pushing the air out of the lungs. Okay. Great. All right. Last couple of things. Thank you for doing that. And again, I would highly recommend doing this for yourself in that time before your presentation, just in that focus time. Just spend a little time breathing. And you can even practice this while you're walking around, watching TV. Are you breathing? Check in every now and then and ask yourself if you're breathing and if you're allowing your lungs to fill, if you're allowing your belly to relax enough to suck in the air. Because if you're not breathing, you're not able to produce enough sound, which makes it harder to articulate, which makes it harder for your audience to understand you. But it also makes you more and more anxious. So the breathing helps with bringing the sort of level down of your anxiety, but it also helps with communication and the people that you're working with understanding what you're saying. Okay. And the last thing is ground yourself. Very, very, very last thing, especially when we're in person. People have a tendency to kind of do a lot of dancing around, not standing on their feet flat. Often they will lean on large objects. I don't have a good large object in here, but there can be a lot of sort of leaning on podiums and things like that. And so just make sure, again, check in with yourself and your body and make sure that you're centered, you're above your feet so you don't fall over, because that would not be fun. And it also just, again, helps with that grounding and calming. So if you take nothing else away, know your audience, use that accessible vocabulary, think about the words you're using, practice. You all said you practice, great, keep doing that. Take care of your audience, take care of yourselves, and share your passion. Okay, that's it. That's all I got for you. If you have, I think there were a few questions. If you want to stick around, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Yeah, that's what I got. Thank you so much for your attention and your interest. And please let us know if you have any questions. And I think Shiver's gonna jump in here for a sec.
Yes, so I also, while I am pulling up my next slide